Here we are on the eve of a new year, and I'm using my brand new reflector rotisserie oven for the first time. And I've got a chicken on there, and that's going to be our New Year's Eve meal. Simple fare, but I think it's going to be pretty good. Anyway, the ingenuity. This is a reproduction of a reflector oven that was used in the 1800s. And their ingenuity, because they didn't have wood stoves, they didn't have ovens in that time period, absolutely amazes me. All right, got that cooking. I'm going to do some mashed potatoes and some turnips. And that's going to be our New Year's Eve meal tonight. While I'm waiting for my chicken to roast up there, I thought I'd talk a wee bit about the history of both Christmas and New Year's Eve and how we recognize it and celebrate it today. So I'll start with Christmas. And it wasn't until, in the Americas at least, until 1870 that it was declared a national holiday. And ironically, if we go over to England, which is the roots of America, they celebrated Christmas up until the year 1645, where under Oliver Cromwell, a Puritan, made it a crime to celebrate it. They didn't believe that the worshiping of Jesus Christ should be associated with celebration. So the Puritans were the first to colonize the Americas, Plymouth Rock, Jamestown, other way around, Jamestown, then Plymouth Rock. It was also a crime there. But by the 18th century, things are getting a wee bit watered down with the number, hundreds of thousands of immigrants coming into the colonies. So the Germans, for example, brought the tradition of bringing a tree into the cabin. The Catholic immigrants brought the tradition of setting out small nativity scenes. And that evolved eventually into President Grant and the cabinet on June 1870 declaring Christmas a national holiday. And I'm going to just check my bird here, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how New Year's evolved, and that's even more convoluted. So on to New Year's Eve celebrations and how they evolved. And they evolved differently in the colonies versus what we know now today as Canada. So prior to 1752, New Year's Eve was celebrated in the colonies on March the 24th. And this gets really confusing because in that same time period, the English government decided to switch to the Gregorian calendar from the Julian calendar. Gets really confusing, and I can't sort it out. But so now New Year's Eve becomes January the 1st. And the celebrations aren't a whole lot different than how we do it today. So friends and family would gather, sit around the fire, have a few libations, have good food, good company, good conversation. But there were a lot of traditions that I found pretty fascinating in that time period. So one of them was to the host would, at the first chime of the clock, open the door of the house, and that was to let the old year out. And on the last chime of the clock, he'd bring in the new year by closing the door. Also, at the end of the evening, this little fella poet over there in Scotland named Robby Burns writes a song called Auld Lang Syne. And essentially, what Robby Burns was trying to, the message he was trying to give in that song was to forget the past and embrace the future. And so that was sung in all the homes. Another tradition was to, before they'd break fast in the morning, they'd flip open a Bible and randomly point at a verse. They'd read that verse, and that was supposed to be a foreshadow of the year to come. Another celebration was on the new day, on January the 1st, they would have open houses. So in the communities or even in rural areas, they would go from house to house and do brief visits. They wouldn't stay long because they wanted to get to as many houses as possible. Anyway, so that's how they celebrated then, and we're still celebrating it today. And I'm going to turn my chicken one more time. So in what we know as Canada today, it evolves a little different than it did in the colonies. So it starts off in France, actually, with King Louis XIV, who on New Year's Day, upon rising, would welcome, men only, of course, certain people, certain aristocrats, into his bedchambers, if you would, and he'd hold council with them. And by the 18th century, that makes its way across the English Channel. And becomes a thing where the monarch or the sovereign would host certain people, again, males only. Finally makes its way to the New World, where the governor would hold a celebration on January the 1st, where he would, essentially he'd give an address informing his people of how things were doing in the motherland, if you would. And that tradition carries forward to this day in the Commonwealth, with to this very day, with the Queen's New Year's address, which carries on. The State of the Union address in the States, although it isn't held on January the 1st, basically gets its origins from a similar evolution, if you would. And it carries on, and it's done, as I said, to this very day, where the governor of Canada will hold council. Now, women are allowed these days. But if we go back into the 1800s, at every outpost across this country, very remote outposts, would be the one day where the chief factor or the person in charge would not just give them a single ration of rum. He'd roll out barrels of it, and they'd get full rations of buffalo meat. And the men would all fire a salute, and that was how they celebrated New Year's in Canada. That's how it got its origins. Anyway, I think my chicken's just about done, and it does seem a bit ironic, because we had some guests visit our cabin this morning, and we had a whole cackle of turkeys out there. So you'd think it would be a turkey on there rather than only a little chicken, but anyway, it's not legal to hunt them, but it's looking pretty good for the spring hunt. But that is till the spring hunt comes, and then you can't find a bird anyway. Anyway, I'm about ready to carve up this bird. Done to perfection. So just before I dine, just a thought. We've had a lot of people comment on how over the past year we've been at this endeavor of stepping back in time, and they've learned a lot. But the reality is we've learned a lot. Like, the comments we get from people, the feedback has been absolutely amazing, as well as the stories that people tell. But yeah, we love it when people sort of pick apart maybe our historical accuracy, or give us hints on how we may do something different or better. Anyway, about to dine here, and I just want to wish everyone a Happy New Year.